So let's move over to France, where this isn't getting a ton of pickup in the American press, but an incredible, and maybe it's because the American press isn't as attuned to the like actual left. I don't know, because if you're on the actual left, the story is incredibly disturbing and validating as to sort of the mushy neoliberal middle and their true allegiance to, what do they say, lowercase d democracy and all of those things. Ryan, what on earth? We can go ahead and put this tear sheet up on the screen. This is from the BBC. French left backs protests after Macron rejects prime minister choice. What is going on behind that headline?
So this is wild. Let's explain to people how this fifth French Republic works. So basically, they've got a president and a prime minister. The president is the kind of good-looking guy you put out on the international stage, handles foreign policy.
Doesn't matter if he's short.
Does not matter.
Short game.
The prime minister handles domestic affairs. Traditionally, they've always been from the same coalition, the same party, basically, because that's just how it has worked out. They may have stumbled on a fatal flaw in their Fifth Republican constitution. So in the last election results, the far left finished first, the far right finished second, and then Macron and his center-right party finished third. And I guess you got some little other and then a bunch of like dregs, finishing after that. So you would think, okay, fair enough. The far left gets to form a government, and we go from there. And Macron and the far right are like, no, we actually don't want to see that happen. And they have the power to stop it because the far left did not win an absolute majority, and they don't have anybody forming one with them. So if Macron did appoint somebody from the far left to form a government, the right and the center right and the rest of the dregs would immediately hold a no confidence vote and oust the government. So he could do that. And in Spain, the king did that. They had like an 18-month standoff that was very similar to this one. And the king was like, okay, fine, you know what? The right wing, in this case, was the right wing. The right wing won more votes, but doesn't have a majority. So fine, go ahead, form a government. And like backed off and let them try. Then they failed. And then they let the center left form a government. So Macron is not even allowing that. And so what the left said, okay, fine. You don't like us. You don't like our policies. And Macron has been very, very clear. I don't agree with your policies, your politics. Like, we don't want the left in charge. He's been very clear. He's like, I don't care what the voters said. So they have said, okay, here's this 34-year-old unobjectionable woman who will be our prime minister, and we will take 0 cabinet positions. They're like, that's their concession to the fact that they did not win an outright majority. And Macron's like, no, not good enough, not going to do that.
Right.
And as we saw, you can put up this next element here. So he's sitting down with Le Pen and saying, all right, who knows what he's talking about with Le Pen in these talks.
And the French left, by the way, was so concerned that Le Pen's party would do incredibly well, and the elections were in July, would do so well that that's the bigger context here, is that they all formed a coalition alliance.
Right.
And that's
to fend off the fascists.
Right, exactly.
Right. And so now Macron is like, well, let's sit down with fascists. And so you've got all these bizarre arguments where they're saying the left doesn't deserve to govern because some of the people who voted for the left weren't actually voting for a left-wing agenda. They were only voting to block Le Pen.
Right. So it's illegitimate.
And you know what? Okay, A, that's true. B, like, psychoanalyzing why somebody voted for somebody is ridiculous.
You have no idea.
Like, they voted for them.
Yeah.
C, that's the only reason anybody has ever voted for Macron.
right.
So by Macron's own reasoning there, Macron is thoroughly illegitimate.
Yeah.
Nobody has voted for Macron. And every time he has won because he's not Le Pen. And so here he is. So now the way, so I talked to Art Goldhammer, who we've had on the show before, who's a French, he lives in France, an American, lives in France. He translated Piketty, he translated, Tocqueville is like, he's great. He's like, I have no idea where this ends. Usually he's like, here's where this goes from here. And he's like, it has the feel of the beginnings of an extremely bitter divorce. Like there's absolutely no good faith among any of the parties. And he's like, it might be a fatal flaw
That's
in the Constitution.
a very poignant.
Because there actually is no way out of it. So, and to make people understand why this is happening now in this new era where we have kind of far left and far right both rising, for the entire history of the French Republic, and this goes for other countries too, the dominant parties were the center left and the center right. And so if let's say Macron's center right party wins the most votes, the center left wins the second, and then the far left and far right are off in the background somewhere, the center right would then grab a couple of little tiny parties from the far right and they'd form a government. Center right wouldn't complain because they didn't win the election and they get to be part of this governing coalition. And in general, the voters wouldn't complain because they'd say, okay, this is fair enough. Like a majority of people voted either for a center right or a far right government. Now, when the dominant polls are the far left and the far right, it's not clear who the far left forms its coalition with. Because, okay, let's say the far left forms its coalition with the center left. Who then is the prime minister? Well, it would only be fair that it's from the far left because they won the most votes. But at the same time, a majority of voters voted against the far left. You know, let's say 55, 60% wanted center left over all the way to the right. So the center left party says, no, actually, if you want to represent the median voter, it should be us. But there is no median voter anymore because you're using this old spectrum rather than understanding that actually you've got different wings of populism that are the overwhelming majority against the kind of fading neoliberal elites.
Yeah,
and so the old frame just doesn't work for the new politics.
It's so interesting you say that because I was just going to bring up this. I'm reading from this Unheard article, Keir Starmer doesn't understand populism, because Keir Starmer gave a speech this week that was described as, quote, gloomy by a lot of the press. And this, the author of this article makes a really, really good point that actually really the failure when Starmer was talking about, quote, the snake oil of populism in his speech, he's pinning all of those riots, the Southport riots that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, on, quote, 14 years of Tory failure, just pinning the blame on the Tories. And this writer says the public has a sense that the roots of our national woes go much deeper, more than 40 years of a broken economic and social settlement, which we owe to Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair, as well as their heirs Gordon Brown, David Cameron, and Rishi Sunak. The mantra, there's no alternative, has produced decades of rampant economic and social individualism dressed up as progress, when in reality we've gained individual freedoms, yet lost stability and common solidarity. This is connected to what we talked about in the first block of the show today about people like RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard finding common cause with Donald Trump because he's somewhat heterodox in the Republican Party on particular issues, you know, how he uses government, et cetera. But still, not even that being the perfect marriage. Our categories don't work anymore. They only kind of superficially ever did for the average voter. And everybody right now is just spinning their wheels and reeling to try and figure out, you know, the solution. But people like Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron and arguably Kamala Harris, and maybe even to some extent you could say Donald Trump, they have no real idea how to address this. And James Pogue wrote that story about Chris Murphy for the New York Times. I don't know if you read it, about how Chris Murphy is genuinely trying to figure out what Democrats can do to address some of the concerns that the new right is tapping into. He's like the only person in the Democratic Party other than Roe, who's like Ro Khanna. Oh, really? Well, he should talk to you. Who's like actually seriously engaged in that project. You see basically none of that from the Starmer, Macron, Harrises of the world. Right. Yes, that's right. And so and we can put up this third element here from this Macron ally, Bayrou. This is a great follow.
I don't have my glasses on, so I can't tell exactly what his ad is. What he's Arnaud Bertrand. He's great on so much stuff.
Yeah.
What is he?
He's fantastic. It's Arnaud Bertrand, so RNAUDBERTRAND.
And so he's talking here about how this Macron advisor is just very explicitly saying that it's the left program that Macron objects to, and that they as the establishment elite object to, and that they're going to cling to power against this. Come hell or high water. The fact that this is happening at the exact same time as they arrested the Telegram founder in Paris, I don't think is. I think it might be a coincidence in the fact that the events are lining up at the same time, but it's similar to the trends are similar. The establishment elite is going to need censorship and authoritarianism to kind of lock down this bubbling rise of populism. And so what Bayrou is arguing there is he's stating a fact, which is that the left did not win an outright majority. And so, but then he goes on, therefore they should not be able to govern. It's like, but whenever the center left or the center right won 45% of the vote, they were not told, and were the leading vote getter by far, they were not told, oh, you only won 45%, you don't get to govern. If it's the center left, the left-wing parties would join with them and they'd form a coalition. If it's center right, the right-wing parties would join with them and form a coalition. But the center is unwilling to do that for either pole.
Right.
And so
center left and center right too, whether it's Mitch McConnell or Chuck Schumer.
Yeah, right. And so, although in our system, they seem a little bit more willing to do that. And also that our centers are holding better.
Yeah.
Then, well, maybe are the center and the Democratic parties holding better than the one in the Republican Party?
Yeah. No, I mean, that's the question. Is that, like, how much longer does that last?
Right.
I posed that question actually to Rick MacArthur, who's the president of Harper's and publisher of Harper's, because he wrote a story for Spectator World about how Democratic elites have been able to control the party so well over the course of the last several decades. And this is on undercurrents too, where there is such a difference between how Republicans totally lost control when Donald Trump came along, and Democrats fought Bernie Sanders tooth and nail in 2016, were able to use the muscle of the DNC to shut down the Sanders campaign or to hamper the Sanders campaign. Did it again in 2020 by getting Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar to come together. And the Republicans had basically no ability to do anything about Donald Trump, whereas Democrats actually, like the DNC, figured out how to muscle him out of the picture and to get rid of people like Marianne and Tulsi, just basically shut those campaigns down. And I mean, not shut them down, but hamper their ability to be serious contenders.
No. It's a good segue into our next segment, which is an interview with independent Senate candidate Dan Osborne. We don't know if this will be the independent that breaks through and becomes an actual senator, but I do think it's going to happen. Like over the next several cycles, somebody's going to break through and do it. I mean, obviously Bernie Sanders already did it, winning as an independent in Vermont in 2006, but nobody else has been able to do it since then. Unless, right? No, I'm not thinking of anybody who is like a fake version of that.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.